So here we are, another Friday. Yippee-ki-yo-ki-yay. The days of looking forward to the weekend somehow during this pandemic are far less significant, since one day seems to run into the next and seems to be just about the same.
It's amazing how days follow each other, isn't it? It's amazing.
One comes and then it's gone, and then there's another one.
It's amazing.
Mitch Trubisky is the new backup quarterback for the Buffalo Bills, and the significance of this is negligible, I think, given that Allen's going to play every game that he can, and if he's not healthy, Trubisky, is he good enough to step in and do what Allen does? I think the answer to that is no. Do you agree?
Well, I agree with that. But the one thing I would say, by the way, Trubisky made the playoffs twice for the Bears, and even though Bears fans thinks that he was a disaster. The one thing I would say, and I think the people within the Bills organization are saying, is that at least when Trubisky goes in for Allen, if he has to, they don't have to change the playbook very much. You know, they're about the same size. There's an expectation that Allen's not afraid to run. Trubisky's not afraid to run. I think from this, just from the position of not having to change the playbook at all, from the starter to the backup quarterback, I think it's enough to think that this is a win for the Bills.
Well, I would say this much: in any organization, not just the Buffalo Bills as an example, but in any organization, you lose your starting quarterback, your chances of going to a Super Bowl are almost non-existent. So if the Bills aspire to be a Super Bowl team, and I think they're at that point right now,
yeah,
where they think they're good enough, and probably are good enough, if things fall the right way, to potentially be a Super Bowl team once again. But they're going to do it with Allen. I don't think they're going to do it with Trubisky.
Well, so, but as I said, Trubisky, did make the playoffs a couple of times. This guy's not just the Walking Dead.
Well, he's not horrible, but and it's I'm not trying to slam Trubisky and his abilities. He would be very good as a backup quarterback. But again, I'm just trying to state that the significance of this is negligible, given that if your starting quarterback goes down, you're in trouble.
Wow.
Almost regardless who the backup is. And that's any organization.
Yeah. By the way, the other Buffalo team lost again.
Shocking, huh?
That's 13 now.
So much for the significance of bringing in a new coach and having that immediate impact, huh? Which we talk about all the time.
Well, but the new coach was 6 feet to the right for the previous 12 games.
Oh, I get it. Calgary has been another story altogether, huh?
Well, and they've got back-to-back games with the Maple Leafs this weekend. And they won their first three. They did not look good in their fourth for Daryl Sutter. And the only way that Daryl Sutter, I think, can get this team to win is if they keep the goals against and shots down. And that'll be a big challenge against the Maple Leafs.
A basketball show today, as we will address a bunch of issues. Bob Ryan of the Boston Globe, Michael Grange of Sportsnet will join us when we continue after these messages. We are back on the program. Yours truly, Bob McCown, along with John Shannon. Sadly, our friend Bob Ryan has not shown up yet. Maybe he'll make an appearance in the midst of this epic production, or perhaps he will be lost in an impenetrable forest somewhere.
He's in the ether. He's in the ether somewhere.
We don't know. We hope he's okay. Hope he didn't get snowed in or something, Boston. But we are fortuitous in that our friend Michael Grange of Sportsnet joins us on the program. Grange, you look fine. How are you?
I'm well, Bob. I'm well. Good to be on the air with you and John for a long time, but it feels like yesterday.
It was not yesterday, I can assure you of that. But it's nice.
I don't know. Yesterday's just another day, though, Michael. You never know.
That's right. Yesterday could have been 2017.
So Hoops Talk. Let's start with this. I know we're going to spend a little bit of time with the Raptors, but in a normal year, the best teams in the NBA will win more than 70% of their games. And that would be, you'd be looking at 57 plus wins a year. And it's not unusual to have several teams over 60. And, maybe even a couple more in the high 50s. We have one team this year, albeit it's going to be an abbreviated year, with a winning percentage of over 700, and that's the Utah Jazz. And
who, by the way, the Raptors played tonight.
And it leaves us, or it leaves me in a situation of, as I try and assess who the best team is, who's most likely to win. And usually you can come up with one or two teams that you think these are the teams that are going to be the favorites. I don't know, Grange. I don't know about you, but it seems to me that there might be 6, even 8 teams that logically could prevail here. Am I nuts?
Oh, you're not nuts. You're very correct to point out it's an unusually flat year, and Utah was getting a lot of buzz as this kind of juggernaut powerhouse type thing. But you're right, even at kind of their peak winning percentage, and then they've slid a little bit. They were kind of projecting to be a 61, 62 win team. And, just as a point of comparison, the Raptors last year, who no one thought of as a juggernaut, they ended up playing at a 60 win pace. So that's what Utah is kind of trundling along at here. But I think there's a couple of reasons for that. And, one is, the Lakers, they've had some injuries and they could win 45 games in an 80-game season or play at that pace. And I don't think anyone would not think them to be 1 or 1A as the favorite. I think if you look at the other end of, you look at the East, I think, the Sixers have been near the top of the conference all year, and they're a very good team, but, they're definitely in that kind of Milwaukee Bucks, they got to prove it because they just have not asserted themselves in the playoffs since they've been an elite team. And then the Brooklyn Nets are a team that, when they've briefly been together and had their big three on the floor, which hasn't been very often, they've been incredible, like honestly incredible. And, but they've been so shorthanded, either with Harden not being with them early. You had Kyrie Irving going on his unscheduled vacation, and now Kevin Durant, who they're understandably being very, very careful with his hamstring problem. So they've just never been at full strength, and yet have kind of emerged as the cream of the East. So I think there's probably, when I see teams that I think I could envision lifting a championship trophy, I actually see 4 in the East. I think Brooklyn is the favorite. I see Philly, Milwaukee, and Miami, and they've all kind of emerged as the top 4 teams right now. Miami is kind of getting a little slept on because they were so slow to start. And then I see 3 in the West. I do think Utah is a championship level team. The Lakers, obviously, and the Clippers. So, and that's unusual. To your point, I think typically we'd go into the playoffs or this time of the year, there might be 2 or 3 or 4 teams maximum. But to have 7 legitimate contenders, I think is unusual, but probably welcome.
Slide your mic back out again because we're having a little issue with Michael's microphone.
So Michael, is this a case of this regular season, the 72-game season, not meaning as much, plus the expanded playoffs, so the players aren't as, I guess, focused on, they just want to get in, and then they'll figure out what to do in the playoffs?
John, I kind of think it's not that different than what all of us are going through to a certain extent. Right. I think it's been a blah 400 days, if whatever it is. I mean, once you get through the crises, it's just sort of Groundhog Day. I think the season itself is compressed. There's been a number of teams that have been hit at various times hard by COVID, and that has in turn kind of compressed the season even further. And for the elite teams that went deep in the bubble last year, I think there's been a hangover effect. And so, and with no fans in the building for the most part, home court isn't as significant a factor in terms of making sure you get it. So I think just generally, it sort of feels like the league is playing along at kind of 90% efficiency, 90% of capacity. It's not that there's not some great basketball being played, but there's just so many flat nights where, you have a team for whatever reason third game and fourth night for the third week in a row. And, you're just getting some weird performances. And so I think last year, the playoffs on the bubble were electric,
but they were different. They were different.
They were different. But I think what's going to be interesting, John, actually is because the environment was so confined and controlled last year, the level of play was extraordinary. And I think it was because players were rested, no distractions, lots of sleep, lots of time off your feet. And when they hit the floor, you were getting the best they had. And so we'll see if that translates this year. But I think it just feels like, to me, I can't say it for sure, but it just feels like there's kind of a holding pattern going on. And teams want to get in the area they need to be in, but they're not, nobody's trying to win 65 or 70 games. And I kind of wonder too, like you look at the best team we've all ever seen regular season, that 73 win Warriors team from 2015-16. You can't have a better regular season than that. We'll never see a better one. And where did they end up, right? They've ended up second place. So I think there's sort of an understanding. You need to be good enough to get where you need to go. And then after that, try and be healthy.
Yeah, excuse me. It speaks to the New England Patriots undefeated season where they wound up losing in the Super Bowl to the Giants too. Sometimes we overrate the significance of victories in the regular season. I must point out that one team you neglected to mention in your rundown of teams you think are capable of winning a championship, and I'm not here to suggest that they are, but the Phoenix Suns sit, I think, second or third in the West. And what is even more intriguing to me, Grange, is that, correct me if I'm wrong, in the play-in schedule at the end of last year, they were allowed in, won 8 consecutive games, all 8 games that they played, and still did not make the playoffs. So if you lump that little group of games into this year, they had the best record in the NBA over that period of time.
Yeah, you're right. And I guess it was an intentional oversight. I think what you're seeing with the Clippers is the Chris Paul effect, who, joined the team this year, and he's kind of like Kyle Lowry plus, right? He brings all the same attributes that Kyle Lowry brings to a team. Here in Toronto, we're very familiar with that, what all that means in terms of IQ and toughness and leadership. But he's just a little bit more. And he's just brought all of that to what was a pretty good core in Phoenix. But I don't think anyone projected this. And, what's really interesting is I'm sure we're going to talk maybe about the MVP race a little bit, but Chris Paul is at once a first ballot Hall of Famer. Like, there's no question about it. He may be, if you study the matter, he may be the best point guard that's ever played. And yet because he's never had that huge playoff success and has had some really high profile playoff failures, not all because of him, he's kind of underrated, right? And here he is. You look at what he did last year in Oklahoma City. And, he took a very young kind of a team nobody really weighed very heavily, and they were very difficult out in the playoffs last year. And then what he's done here in Phoenix to turn them into a fringe contender, we can say. Certainly they're putting together a great regular season. Chris Paul is a guy who probably should be in the MVP conversation, but he hasn't yet been, and we'll see if that'll change.
Well, the whole Houston experiment for him was a disaster. Let's face it.
It wasn't.
Except you're supposed to win championships.
They were up 3-2. And he pops his hand.
You're supposed to win championships.
And that's the story of Chris Paul. Is
right.
At very critical moments, either he's had an injury, or it's almost like Steve Nash in Phoenix, where it seems like at every moment they should have pushed and broken through. Somebody was hurt or suspended or something. And so he's played his whole career under this little cloud, Chris Paul has. But, I can remember vividly at the end of game, it was Chris Paul holding his hamstring, and they were up 3-2, and they lose the next 2 games. And that was the team to the Warriors. And there's no question in anyone's mind that Rockets team was, if not the best team in the NBA, was second best. And
when you said that Chris Paul was maybe the best point guard of all time, my mind started to whir, and of course I started to whir in black and white first. Dating back to when it was the St. Louis Hawks and the Boston Celtics and the Knicks and all those guys, and then it did quickly go to Steve, and so in his I for the record, you would have rather had Chris Paul than Steve Nash?
Oh, I would, yeah. I just think he's maybe not quite as elegant an offensive player as Steve was, and Steve brings a whole boatload of other attributes. But Chris Paul, if he's not the best point guard that's ever played, he's the best great point guard that's ever played defensively. Okay. And there's a handful of guys out there who, Michael Ray Richardson, and there's other guys who were more defensive specialists who maybe were more impactful. But if you'd have Jason Kidd as on an all-class, all-world defender. You'd have Chris Paul and John Stockton would be in there too. Sure. And if I were to pick, if I could have any point guard, it would probably be between John Stockton and Chris Paul. And and yet, again, Stockton made the finals, and he's got the records in terms of assists and steals that'll never be broken. And of course, I'm overlooking Magic Johnson. But
I was going to throw that one out there, and the only thing
I'm not sure he's a point guard, though. I'm not sure.
Well, he is, people, and it's crazy to overlook him. Because we talk about greatest player of all time, and it's always Michael. Is it MJ? Is it Michael? And really, it's just as legitimate a question to say, is it Magic or is it Kareem? And sure. We kind of go over those, But anyway, so Chris Paul, he's just 2 years less service time than LeBron James, and he's never had a bad season. He's had a number of seasons that are statistically, when you kind of do the more enhanced stats we have available to us now, are as good as almost anyone who's ever played. And he's done it year after year. He just stacks them up. And it would be an incredible story if he were to take this Phoenix team, as Bob points out, and do something really special with it. But I personally wouldn't bet on them. I think they're just too young and unproven elsewhere in their lineup.
I don't disagree with you at all, Grange. I just thought that it was an omission that needed to be noted.
Yep. Totally.
Given Paul's,
they're second in the West, right?
So they're second in the West, and as I say, you add 8 wins on at the end of last year, which aren't really legitimate because it isn't exactly the same team. But nonetheless, this is a team, this is an organization that has been at or near the bottom of the NBA for a considerable period of time. And teams like that, we often, when they start to rise, we don't pay attention to them. We're always looking for the team that was really good last year. And this team has just kind of exploded onto the scene. And
hey, by the way, you mentioned Michael Jordan. Michael.
Why is he coming back?
Well, no, 26 years ago today, he came back.
Wow.
That is stunning.
I know, 26 years ago.
It's funny because my claim to fame is, I know I'm the only Canadian journalist who covered his final championship with the Bulls in '98, covered his first retirement, and covered that return in Madison Square Garden. So that's my triumvirate that'll never be. And the story I remember about him retiring at the time, in '98 or following the win in '98, was being in the United Center and listening to him, give his farewell speech. And at the time, I'd read something where he was a member of 11 golf clubs simultaneously, and saying, I really want to spend more time with my family. I was like,
sell
look,
your
dude,
clubs then.
I'm sorry. No dude who's a member of 11 different golf clubs is retiring to spend more time with his family. But anyway, that's an
I want to spend some time talking about the Toronto Raptors appropriately, where they are, where they're going, what decisions are going to be made over the next couple of weeks in terms of their future and how they should deal with what the present is. And we want to talk about that in an extended period. So let's take a break here. We'll come back more. Bob Ryan apparently is not going to join us, but we're fortuitous that Michael Grange is with us, and we will continue the conversation after these messages. Yours truly, Bob McCown, John Shannon, Michael Grange of Sportsnet in conversation about basketball. The Toronto Raptors have now lost 6 games in a row. 5 of those came with a lineup of guys who probably needed to be introduced to the audience on a regular basis, on a nightly basis.
Because, introduced to each other.
I assume the second stringers know who the second stringers are, but you're right. And we can talk about the fairness of forcing the Raptors to play these games with a lineup that was incapable of winning. And now you've got, well, you had in the last game, you had 2 of the 3 back, everybody but Anunoby. And, but it's going to take time for them to get into this. They're now, what, 11th, Grange? Is that where they stand in the East?
11th, 17 and 23, 6 games under 500.
It raises the question of what do you do if you are management of this team? Do you stick to the game plan that you had at the beginning of the year, perhaps, and think, well, series of circumstances have put us in this position, a very slow start, 2-8, then a recovery to get back to 500, then the COVID thing. How do you evaluate this team? Let's start with that question. Is this a middle of the pack team? Is it a lower of the middle of the pack team? It's not a championship team. I think that we can be sure of.
Yeah, and that's the key there, Bob. They're a top 4, top 6 team in the East. I think there's a big gap between them and, say, the top 2 teams at least. I mean, I think Brooklyn is going to be prove to be head and shoulders. So, and I don't think any iteration of this Raptors team would be a threat to them. Brooklyn's just got too many guns. After that, I mean, you can see the Raptors giving problems to almost anybody, but they're not going to win a title. They know that. You and I know that. I think so. The question becomes, if you're not going to win a title, it's going to be uphill just to even put yourself in a good position to make any kind of noise in the playoffs, given where they are now. And you're playing in Tampa, no fans, minimal playoff revenue, all those kind of considerations. Is this not the year to punt? And I think that they kind of know that internally. And so I think that they're very, very open to any opportunity they might have to move on from this core. I wrote a week ago that Kyle Lowry, as an example, was probably not going to be traded. And I'm not sure that's not still the case. That was based on conversations with 2, 3, or 4 different people who are kind of in a good position to know where Kyle's head is at and things like that. But the challenge with Kyle is, for all the right reasons, it's not going to be a divorce. It's not going to be, we're going to send you anywhere that will have you. It's going to be, Kyle, there's an opportunity with this club. Does that interest you? And all of that. And when you kind of go through that math, and with the number he has on his deal, he's still owed $31 million, or on paper, $31 million. It's just a really tough hurdle to get over, when the Raptors' precondition is they don't want to take back any bad contracts or extended contracts. So they're looking for about $25 million in expiring money. They're looking for at least some kind of draft pick and a first round pick, and at least some kind of young prospect. And And then in turn, and so really it comes down to Miami making a trade the other day. So that's kind of taken them out of the picture. It really comes down to Philadelphia. And I think there's a lot of obvious reasons why there's a great fit on the floor. Kyle's obviously from Philly. But here's the challenge with that one that I don't think people are calculating all that well is if you're Daryl Morey, who's been parachuted in from Houston, and he's kind of the Chris Paul of executives, right? Like he's built a lot of great teams. He's never won. This would be his shot to add to the Ben Simmons, Joel Embiid twosome. So whatever move he's going to make in terms of the prospect capital he has, the draft capital he has, he's got to be sure it's the one that's going to put them over the top. And with Kyle, who's 35 on trade deadline day, and if you do make that trade for Kyle, who's a free agent, you're giving up a lot of negotiating power to Kyle Lowry this coming off season in terms of, you can't give up that draft and prospect capital for a guy who's a rental. Not if he's Kyle Lowry. I'm sorry, he's not worth that as a rental. And once you've made that swing, you're out of the running for any other moves you might want to make. And all of a sudden, Kyle turns around and says, "Yeah, I want 2 years, $30 million." And when you factor in luxury taxes, the Sixers have 3 players already on max deals. That all of a sudden that $60 million you're paying to Kyle Lowry at age 35 is probably about $120 million when you factor in luxury taxes. So, so I think that's why, people kind of make that connection with the Sixers, but I don't think it's quite as clear cut as there's an obvious reason that deal might get made, but there are reasons that it might not get made. And so I could kind of see Kyle staying put.
The funny thing, you talk about Murray going to Philly to make a difference and making a big decision. This is the one organization that I think ownership who love analytics. This ownership group loves numbers. I'm not saying there are other teams that don't, but this one lives and dies with analytics. That if they feel that, listen, this is our chance for the short term, are we prepared to take that risk? All those things you mentioned are tremendously valid. This is one for me that just reeks of ownership sticking its nose in and saying, this is what we need.
Yeah, it's a great point.
One way or the other.
Yeah, it's a great point. And it would be one that ownership would have to get in on, just because it is going to eventually.
But I can see them pushing though, Michael.
Yeah,
I can see ownership. I can see ownership pushing him as opposed to him pushing them.
Listen, there is 10 great reasons to make that trade, and but I think, and you can do the math on it, and I think right now there's probably much better than I do, John, how these deals do go down. When they go down, as they kind of reach a point, each side's kind of talked through every proposal they could imagine, and then it just goes quiet, right? Because now it's poker time, and who's going to crack, and so we'll see where that ends up. But for all the reasons I just talked about, the guy I think that gets traded is Norm Powell, and
well, I want to get there, but before we
Sure.
get there, because we're going to have an argument with
because that's what I said yesterday, and Bob thought I was full of it. Just for the record, Michael.
I get why people think Norm Powell is going to be traded, and he might be. I would adamantly disagree with the assessment that he should be traded, but we'll get to that. For a long time in sports, you did not trade key assets to rival teams, whereby that could come back and bite you in the ass. Is Philadelphia a rival team simply because they're in the same conference as the Toronto Raptors? Because they went through a grinding 7-game playoff en route to the Raptors championship? Would Masai Ujiri et al. Be reluctant, in your opinion, Grange, to deal Lowry to the Sixers?
I don't think that would be the factor. I think, if you're dealing Kyle, then, you're kind of accepting that this is, what has been just an extraordinary 7, we're in the 8th year run. is coming to a close and it's time to kind of try and reposition. So you've got to accept that maybe you're stepping back this year, maybe you might be stepping back next year. So you're really making choices for your long-term benefit. So if it ends up, the Sixers finish first in the division, the Raptors finish eighth, and they end up playing each other in the first round of the playoffs, which isn't inconceivable at all. It would be kind of awkward, but I don't think that's why the deal wouldn't get done. I really think it wouldn't get done because I really think it's Philly that would be the people to back out for the reasons I talked about.
Let me throw another thing at you. For some period of time, there was speculation that the LA teams periodically might be intrigued.
They can't do it. They can't do it. The Lakers, they don't need Kyle. I mean, they do, but they don't, and they don't have the pieces really to make a deal. And the Clippers, who desperately need Kyle, have no draft picks. And the only way they could put salary together would involve the Raptors taking on years of bad money for players they don't want. And really, on terms of young prospects, the Clippers don't have either. There's just not a fit there. There is a fit the people may or may not know, Ty Lue, the head coach of the Clippers, is one of Kyle Lowry's very closest friends in the NBA. And Chauncey Billups, who's an assistant coach with the Clippers, might be Kyle Lowry's closest friend in the NBA. So there's a reason, there's a connection there, but it's just the mechanics of that deal can't work.
And there's that other guy, that he won with is another connection.
Right. And that's not, that's ignoring Serge and Kawhi. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So but I mean, and that gets to Kyle's, $30 million, and it's just a hard deal to manufacture.
All right, let's get to the issue at hand, really, and that is what if not Kyle Lowry, and it could still be Kyle Lowry, but if you don't move Kyle Lowry, are you obligated to move Norman Powell? And the reason behind that would be that Powell is on a contract that is about to expire. It pays him around $11 million a year. Yeah. It is not unreasonable to assume that Norman Powell will want a significant salary increase and will get it for next year. His performance this year has been extraordinary, and he's put himself in a position where he's, at least in my view, he's probably a $20 million a year guy going forward over multiple years. The consensus seems to be that Powell is expendable for the Toronto Raptors, that he is the most likely guy to go, that you should get something for him because you're not going to re-sign him. And I assume, Mr. Grange, based on your very brief comments from a moment ago, you adhere to that opinion, that it is inevitable that Norman Powell will be dealt.
Close to inevitable. Here's an interesting, I've been kind of noodling around with some numbers and things like that. And if I were to ask you, who are the best five shooters in the NBA today? Who would be?
Well, you got to Steph.
There'd be Steph Curry,
yep.
Dame Lillard,
yep.
Duncan Robinson, although he's, we're talking shooting, not scoring.
James Harden's not bad.
Joe Harris is shooting 50% from three.
Right.
I can do with very little effort. I'm talking very little, the most basic kind of parameters. So in the past 2 years, players who've hit 200 threes and who've shot with a true shooting percentage. So that's your overall shooting percentage from 2, from 3 free throws of over 625, which is a very elite number. There's 4 guys on the list, and Norm Powell's one of them. He's the only guy. His shooting performance these past 2 years is absolutely elite. And what's amazing to me is how little discussion. You never see Norm Powell talked about by kind of other NBA voices. He's never mentioned on a national broadcast. He's never kind of on Woj's podcast. He's He's the most slept on player in the entire league, bar none, at least in public facing. So that's just a bit of a preamble. And he would fit in on any team that has, there's at least 20 teams in the NBA that he would fit very well with. Not exactly 20, but any of the contenders, Philly, Chicago, Miami, either LA team, he would be a great fit because everyone needs his level of shooting. He can do it off the bench. He can do it in transition. He can do it. So there's that. He would be probably an even better fit for that next tier of teams, like those ones who are kind of
like
trying
the
to,
Knicks.
Yeah, Knicks, almost anyone, right? Those teams that are trying to get over the hump, and not only because in that environment, you'd be talking not just about his shooting, but he's a great culture guy. He's a great guy with young players, great work ethic, all these things that would sort of be, he's got a ring, got tons of playoff experience. So you'd want to inject that into, a team that's trying to make some noise. And then on top of all those things, he's, that $11 million contract, he's an extraordinary bargain. And so if you're building, the benefit of you adding Norm Powell, not only for this playoff run, is you would get his bird rights. And so in a very competitive free agent environment, you would be the team that could, wouldn't have to fit him under cap space. You could go over the cap to sign him, all those things. So, and so the question is, what would you get in return? And that's what we're going to find out in the next week. But
well, maybe we are, but I mean, you have just very eloquently made my case for me. And my case is I'm not trading Norman Powell for all the reasons that you talked about. And there's one more that I want to point out. On a team that is almost devoid of players that can put the ball on the floor and go to the basket efficiently, Norman Powell has that asset too.
Yeah, no, and that's what distinguishes him from like the Joe Harris's.
You're right.
The pure shooters in the league, the Duncan Robinsons, because he's got another element to his game.
But this speaks to what the philosophy of the management team is. What is the philosophy of this team for the next 3 years? What is it?
I don't know.
I mean, know. Does Masai know, or does
I think
is Masai going to be here?
That's another question. No guarantee of that. I would bet yes, but no guarantee. I think that they are completely in transition, and I think that they've committed to 3 players who are all very good, none great. I think they look at Norm as, of those 3 they've committed to, Van Vliet, Siakam, and OG. And Obi, they see Norm as a step below them. I think that they have real problems with him as a defender and as a playmaker, as a overall IQ player. He's not the only guy in the league who scores at his, you score the way he scores. People overlook a lot of flaws, but that's what I think they see as a flaw. And so I think that they're trying to create some room now that they've committed to those 3 players to add and improve. And so if you don't make any trades and you end up, let's just say you sign Kyle and you sign Norm, and you've got Chris Boucher, who I presume they'd want to keep around. That's 6 players, and you'd be at about 100 and maybe 110, 15 million bucks. That you're already over the cap for 6 guys. The salary cap room you worked so hard to preserve this past off season is gone. And are you really all that much better than a nice 50-win team that gets beat in the second round every year? So I think that's the challenge that they're facing, is they won a title. How can they position themselves to add that next key player to help them win the title again?
Yeah.
Well, trading Norman Powell is the consensus opinion. I understand that. Is this organization prepared to consider the possibility of trading either Siakam or Anunoby? Nobody talks about trading Siakam.
Anunoby, no, they can't anyway. His extension hasn't kicked in yet, so he'd be very difficult to trade. Siakam that's an interesting one. I don't think it's impossible. Not this year, but in the future.
Well, but do you want to keep Norman Powell? Is Norman Powell and his offensive skill set so important to this organization? My difficulty is if you take Norm Powell out of this rotation, and he's been a starter almost all of this year, mostly because of injuries, but nonetheless, he's earned whatever minutes he's gotten. Where's your offense coming from?
I agree with you. And another way to look at this, guys, is, I have criticized Masai and Bobby Webster. I think they really fumbled when they didn't make a bigger effort to bring back Serge Ibaka. But what's kind of interesting to me is I think we all agree Kyle Lowry's got a couple more years left. Like he's not falling off a cliff. He's got enough.
I'll give you that.
Yeah, he's got enough of those attributes that he doesn't need every ounce of quickness that he's had his whole career. He can figure it out. And so if you do bring back Norm, who's still kind of improving amazingly, so that's, and Boucher's shown some interesting signs. So if you took that group, that 6 players, and you added a legitimate quality big, I don't know where he would come from, who he would be, but somebody who can.
Well, now you got something to talk about.
Now, yeah, how bad a team is that?
That's a pretty good team, and you're right. We're almost out of time, but you made the valid point there. When they chose to walk away from Gasol and Ibaka, and mostly Ibaka, which I think was a fundamental mistake.
Agreed.
They essentially put themselves in the position they're in right now, of not having any inside presence and getting killed on the boards, and it hurts them every single night. They have to replace that. But do you have to get rid of Norman Powell? If there's a way to keep him, I hope they find that out.
Yeah, I mean, that's
quick, Mike.
So just to finish up, I mean, the one thing that doesn't get explored is bringing back the 6 players I mentioned and adding one very specific piece to them. And that gives you, I think, 2 more years of 50+ wins, and
then you never know, right?
What's the worst out of that? So what's the worst that can happen?
Grange, we must off. Time is our enemy. It's always good to see you and to talk to you. Hopefully you'll give us some more of your time down the road. We enjoyed it very much. Thank you, Michael.
All the best, guys. Good to talk with you.
We'll come back with more after this message. And we are back. McCown and Shannon again. Our thanks to Michael Grange for joining us.
He was on a roll. He was on a roll today.
It's you don't get this all the time, but the Raptors are in such an interesting position right now, where you can debate the merits of what the next move is, and there almost has to be some kind of a move. The last thing they can do is discount what's happened over the last 5 or 6 games and say we're still good enough, because I think we all know they aren't good enough. And the other thing that's happened, John, is once you win a championship, the goal of just being a competitive team, a playoff team,
not good enough.
Doesn't hold water anymore, does it?
No, it doesn't. And I think that that's why I'm a little more aggressive with trying to find a way to get this organization to worry not about this year, the end of this year, or next year. I think they have to look farther down the calendar. I think they have to look 2 or 3 years down the way, and that actually brings up a couple of things. That's why I would get rid of Powell, because I think you could get something for the future for Powell because of everything that Michael talked about, whether it be the bird rights, whether it be his attractive contract for the remainder of the season. But then it also brings up, is your core the right core? Anunoby, is he the right guy? Siakam, is he the right guy? And Van Vliet. Now Van Vliet has worked himself in now to being the fan favorite, being really a guy who's in so many ways the engine of this basketball team.
He's the heir apparent point guard.
Sure. Yeah. So, but I'll tell you what, I would be in a pandemic year with revenues down. I would be looking at nothing short-term and everything long-term. And so that, to me, that's why the Powell trade makes more sense than anything else. It really does.
Well, I would hate to see him go. I do understand your point of view, But there's going to be clearly a reluctance. This organization made some decisions on some players with some big money contracts, and I think they regret at least one of them. And
they gave Anunoby a lot of money.
And I wouldn't have, I'll tell you, up, down, back, forth, and sideways. He has limited offensive ability, limited ability to move the basketball around offensively and be a part of the core. He's not good at putting the ball on the floor. He is a very good defender on a team that was once an elite defensive team, but now is not. And you can't turn back the clock. So do what you do best. And right now this team can score, and they're going to give up arguably their best scorer.
And in my opinion, for what's supposed in my opinion, what they need to do, if you could move both Lowry and Powell at the deadline, I'd do both. I would do both.
We again thank Michael Grange for joining us. For John Shannon, Bob McCown, have yourselves a swell weekend. If the creek don't rise, we'll see you on Monday. Goodbye, everybody.